Hi, it's Pam from Quilt Beginnings in Dublin, Ohio. And today's embroidery video is going to show you how to do Kimberbell's chenille pillows. So if you've never done chenille before, it's a lot of fun. And you can probably tell that I've been working on chenille for a while. Don't wear black when you're working with chenille. But anyways, this pillow, when you get the CD, there are 3 different pillows that you can do. One has just these dots, and that's the one that we're going to do today. There's also one that has like a zigzag stripe, and then this one really takes you back in time. I love the flowers. They're chenille. It reminds me of a bedspread. So anyways, when you do these pillows, they come in 3 sizes. I did the medium size, and the medium size finishes at 16 inches. The other pillows, there's one that is actually 20 inches that's finished size and a 14-inch pillow. So it shows that you can do them in a 5x7, a 6x10, or 8x12 hoop. The 5x7 hoop, when you do that size, it makes the smallest pillow. I use the 6x10 hoop or an 8x12 if you don't have a 6x10, and it made the 16-inch finished pillow. One thing that I wanted to tell you is they actually have this done 2 different ways. So this one is supposed to be gradient color, starting with a light color and moving to dark. And there's 2 different files, which you'll see when we open up the video or the file on the machine. But a word of caution doing this, I actually picked fabrics from light to dark when I did it. So these were some of my selections. And I would highly recommend doing solid fabrics because these were my light to dark, but as I did them, they don't look light to dark because when you chenille something, you're seeing the dominant thread color. So this was my darkest fabric, but you can see it didn't come out as my darkest fabric. So you can do this like a row of light, then a darker light, then a light, medium, light, dark, dark, dark. Or you can do it all in one color. So this is the one we're doing today, and this was all one color of fabric. So for each of these squares, you're going to need your background fabric, which is Velveteen, and they chose Velveteen because it holds things. It holds all of these stitches. But when you look at the fabric amount, just realize that you're going to have 1 layer underneath the chenille, and then 3 more layers added on top of it to create the chenille. But this is the one that we're going to focus on in this video. And again, we have all kinds of Velveteen at the store, which I'll show you at the end of the video. Okay, so the pattern tells you to use a cutaway, which would be no-show mesh. I found that I had better luck using this tearaway, but it's a very soft tearaway. So one of my favorite tearaways is Stitch and Wash because what remains in the project is very soft and you really don't feel it. And you're not going to feel it with your pillow and your Velveteen fabric. So anyways, I went ahead and I pooped my Stitch and Wash. Now remember, I'm doing the 16-inch pillows, so I'm going to be using the 6x10 project size. So when I pull it in, you're going to see that there are 3 different sizes for every pillow. But when you get to these circles that we're doing today, remember, one of the circles were all one color, and the other kind of circles were graded, the gradient colors. So when you pull up the design, no matter what size you choose, if there's 9 steps, it's the pillow that has all one color of circles. If there's 14 steps, it's got the gradient colors. So the first thing you're going to do is sew out your placement line. And I would probably use something that matches the back of my Velveteen, but I'm using a gray here so that you can see it. And it's also what I'm going to use when I do my appliques. And this thread will not show in your design. After I do my placement stitch, it asks for a layer of batting, and Kimberbell has their own batting. I like to use, this was just a different product. It's called Battleizer. You could also just use extra batting that you have left over from a quilt. But again, the layer of batting just gives it some substance and it holds all of your stitches. So when I place this on here, you're going to see that this batting is larger than my hoop area. And it pretty much sticks in place, but if you wanted to, you could tape it. I'm just going to kind of babysit it and go ahead and stitch down my layer of batting. So here we go. So once my batting is stitched, I like to trim my batting real close to this line. If I don't trim it, what happens is it goes into my seam allowance and it makes my seam allowance very bulky. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this. Okay, once we've trimmed our batting, we're going to put it back into the machine and it's going to do a placement line for your velveteen. And you're going to see that it's a little larger than the batting line. So let's go ahead and stitch that out. Okay, so this is the placement line for my velveteen, and they want you to see that this is larger than this point here. And again, we cut away our batting, which it takes it out of the seam allowance. But now we're going to place this on here, and your velveteen, you're going to notice, has nap. So you want to make sure when I rub this way, it's very soft and smooth. When I run up, I can feel that I'm going against the nap. So you want to place it in the machine so your nap is running down towards the bottom of the embroidery hoop. And we want to lay this so it extends beyond all of those placement lines. Now, if you want to tape this in place, you can. I'm just going, it kind of sticks really well to the batting, so I'm just going to watch it so that nothing gets bunched up. But again, feel free to go ahead and tape it. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch that down. Again, I would probably use a white thread, but you will not see this line, so I'm okay with not having white thread on here. So once I have my velveteen tacked in place, the next step is to do a placement line for your circles. Now, I'm doing all one color, so I'm going to be placing this over the whole thing. I could, in essence, skip this step, but I'm going to go ahead and stitch it out since it's in the instructions. But if you were doing the kind that had the colors going from light to dark, you would do the left half first and the right half second. And that's why it's really important to have your nap going the same way. On mine, because they're all the same color, if I made a mistake, I could just flip it over. But if you're going with a pattern like white to black, or a light blue to a dark blue, you can't flip them or your colors would be on the wrong side. So even though I know that I'm going to cover the whole thing, I'm still going to go ahead and stitch out the placement stitch for the circles. Once I've done my placement lines, I'm going to go ahead and put my first piece of fabric over here, one piece. Remember, you've cut 4 pieces for each square. So I'm going to lay, this is my bottom fabric, and when it stitches, it's going to do a double tack down. So we're going to go ahead and stitch this down, and then we're going to trim it away. So let me go ahead and put it in the machine. If you want, you can tape it, but I just kind of watch it. So we're going to go ahead and stitch this down, and you're going to notice that it does a double tack down for each one. It wants to hold it in place good and tight. Okay, so I know it's hard to see, but I really don't want these threads to show, but it is stitched out the circles for each of these. So now what I'm going to do is go in here and trim real close, just like for applique, around each of those circles. Okay. So now I've trimmed everything, and notice we trim like for applique really close, and then I'm going to put it back in, and the next step is to do a finishing stitch. And so you're going to notice it's going to do like a really tight flower stitch. We want to tack this down really heavy because when we add our other 3 layers of fabric to do our chenille, we don't want to accidentally trim this bottom layer. So we're going to put it in and let the machine do its decorative stitch around here. Okay, once your finishing stitch is complete, don't worry if you have a little bit of frays here because we're going to chenille the whole thing, so don't stress out if you have a little bit of fabric showing or a little bit of eyelashes. It's all good. Now we're going to take the other 3 layers that we cut for our chenille. So with 3 layers, I'm going to place all 3 layers over top of this square, and it's going to do a basting stitch. Now, again, I would just keep using the same color I've been using, but at some point, we're going to take this basting stitch out, and when I'm teaching class, a lot of people say, which stitch is it? So for purposes of the video, I'm going to put in bright yellow thread because I'm going to take it out, but I'm going to stitch this in bright yellow thread so that when we get ready to take it out, you'll be able to see what color that is. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so the basting stitch is complete. I used yellow. I'm not sure how well you can see it on there, but I can see it really well close up. But this was just a basting stitch, a long basting stitch, just to give us where the circle lies underneath. So what I'm going to do now is trim around all of these circles, and then we're going to stitch the final stitch, which is the chenille stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and trim real quick. Okay, so once I've trimmed all 3 layers on all 6 circles, I'm ready to do the final stitch, which is the chenille stitch. So I put my gray thread back in. You probably never changed your thread color, but I went back to gray, and now I'm going to do the stripes to do my chenille. So now all of my chenille lines have been stitched, but I can't cut the chenille until I take my basting stitch out. So I'm just going to take my seam ripper, and the yellow stitch I'm just going to take out all the way around here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Again, if you have a hard time figuring out which stitch, feel free to use a different color on this step so that you can see it as well. Okay, so I've taken out most of my basting stitch. These other pieces will fall out as I chenille. But once I've gotten the basting stitch out, I'm going to use my chenille tool. And the long blade is really good for straight. So what I'm going to do is stick it down underneath all 3 layers of fabric. And I'm simply going to push straight across. And I'm going to do this in every one of these channels. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, and if you'll notice, I still have the whole project hoop. I have found out it's much easier to do the chenille and taking the basting stitch out if it's hooped. It creates some tension on the fabric. If you unhoop it and try to do this, the fabric really slides. And if you don't get all 3, just go on back down and do it again. Okay, once you have all of your chenille channels sliced, a lot of people do different things to do the chenille. Some people use a chenille brush, other people use an emery board. I find that just using scissors, and it doesn't hurt the scissors because I've got them closed, but I just take my scissors and I work back and forth. So I'm doing all the top levels right now. And you can see the more that I work it, the more fuzzy or chenille it gets. And then after I do all the tops, I flip my hoop and do the bottoms. So I'm going to continue until I finish these. Okay, so after we've done our chenille, we're going to go ahead and tear away our stabilizer, and then we're going to trim our block. Now, looking from the front of the block, I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch past this line here. So I'm going to lay my ruler on here, and I can see this. I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch past this on all sides. And then I'm going to show you the back. This was the line that I stitched in gray. But when I turn it over, we're actually going to use a different line to sew it. So I've trimmed this a 1/4 inch on all sides, which I'll show you. Okay, but when I turn it over, we're going to use the second line in to sew. So this line won't show. we're going to actually use this as our stitch line. And by doing that, we're going to end up with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is really good because you're going to notice that the Velveteen frays quite a bit. So here are my blocks that I've completed, and I want to make sure my chenille's going the same direction. So I'm feeling to see which way it goes. And what I'm going to do is just sew these together in rows of 3. And what I like to do is just stick a pin through these corner points, and I'm going to sew down. So once I get this together, I'm going to sew the top and the bottom together, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now I've sewn together all 6 pieces of my chenille pillow. So I'm going to add a back different than what they did on the CD. On the Kimberbell pillows, they just do an envelope back, and the instructions are in the CD, and they're very good directions. You'll be able to follow them very easily. But I'm going to show you the kind of covered back that I showed you in the beginning that everybody wants to see how to do. We did a Facebook Live during the COVID shutdown, but a lot of people are still asking for the video, so it's going to be right here with yours. So what I've done is I've chosen my back fabric. And this is kind of a gradient fabric that has more stars at the bottom than at the top. So this is basically a fat quarter of fabric. This finished somewhere around 16 inches. So I've just taken a fat quarter and I've interfaced it with the SF101. I love everything to be interfaced with SF101 because it makes it feel more like home deck fabric. The next thing I've done is I've taken, probably about an 18-inch piece by 3.5 inches wide. And I've interfaced that with the SF101, and I folded that in 2 like this so it's pressed. And the final thing you're going to need to do the pillow is just another 2-inch strip. So I actually had a 45-inch wide strip. I made one 3.5 inches wide interfaced, and this one about 1.5 inches interfaced. And this is going to be for my little tabs that go on the inside of the pillow. So the first thing that I'm going to do is decide where I want the zipper to be on my pillow. So on the pillow back that's already completed, you can see that I have my zipper a little bit towards the top because when I add my flap, it's going to take up, there's a little bit of room for the zipper. So when I cut this, I just want to cut this maybe closer to the top, not quite in half. So I'm just going to take it to my cutting mat and I'm going to cut across here, maybe a little more than 1/3 of the way down. Okay, so I've cut my fabric. I just don't want the zipper in the very middle because if you mess up and it's not quite in the middle, it's noticeable, so I try to offset mine. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 3.5 inch flange that I folded in half, so here it is with the interfacing SF101, and I'm going to lay this with all the raw edges together, and I'm going to go and sew it using my 1/4 inch seam. And you can see that this is going to flip down like this. So I'm going to go ahead, all raw edges, and I'm going to make a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so here's my flap. All my raw edges are together. Now I want to add my zipper. This is a 16-inch finished pillow, and this is a 14-inch zipper. To make this zipper look nice and finished, it's very hard to add a zipper and sew around the zipper pull and keep a straight line. So what we're going to do is we are going to add, so this is my little 2-inch piece that's interfaced. I'm just going to cut it in half to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a tab at this end and a tab at this end. And I like to have about 4 inches just so I can center my zipper. So to have something that's 4 inches, it actually needs to be 8 inches long so that when I fold it, I've got a good 4 inches to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going past the little edge of my zipper here. I'm going to lay this. I'm making a good crease here. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to sew back and forth across my crease. So when I take it to my machine, I can flip it this way or sew across the crease. So I'm going to do that on both sides of my zipper. Okay, so here's my zipper, and make sure after you've done the closed end of the zipper, so here it is laying on top, I've sewn back and forth and folded it back. Make sure when you do this side, you open up your zipper, because if you don't open your zipper, you're not going to have one. It's going to be forever shut. So you can see that this is my tab that stops the zipper at this end, and this is the tab that stops it at the other end. Okay, so that I can sew this on nice and straight, what I'm going to do is flip my zipper over this way, and I'm going to just extend this the same width as my zipper. So I'm just laying my zipper straight like this, and I'm going to cut off both edges. So my zipper's probably, I don't know, an inch and a quarter. But I just like to make this piece larger so that I don't have to worry about when it slips that it twists or anything like that. So you can see that this is just an extension of my zipper pull here. And I'm going to do the same thing at this end. Okay, so here's my zipper, and you can see again, this is just an extension of my zipper, and this is an extension of the zipper. That way my zipper doesn't go clear to the edge of the pillow. So now what I'm going to do is take my zipper with the zipper tabs and fold it right sides together with this. Now I just want my zipper somewhere in the center here. So when I look here, I've got about 3 inches, and I'm going to just center this like this. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfectly centered because remember, we've left about 2 inches all the way around. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my sewing machine, and using my 1/4 inch foot, I'm going to sew all the way down here. Now remember, it's right sides together because when this gets flipped, we want to be able to see your zipper. So I've got the top of the back, all the raw edges with my flap, and then I'm taking this side and folding it right sides together, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch down. If you get to the foot here and it doesn't fit underneath your 1/4 inch foot, simply cut your thread and then bring your zipper pull up and go back to your machine and re-sew. You will not see this stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so here's my zipper. It's now attached to the flap, which is attached to the top half of the back, and all of the layers are sewn together. Now, I need to sew this half of my zipper to this edge. So I'm going to flip the whole thing down like this. I'm just kind of matching up the top and bottom. And now I'm going to sew just the zipper to the bottom half of this. Okay, so now I have my back complete, and if you wanted to, you could top stitch along here and down here, but since it's going to have a pillow in it, you're not really going to need to top stitch that. But you can see now, here's the back of my pillow, and I can take the top of the pillow, and because I have some room here, I can actually center this on here. So I can move it down, up. I want my zipper to be somewhere in the middle. So anyways, before I flip it over, remember, this is the top of the back. You want to make sure with your front, remember, we had all the nap running down. So I want to make sure when I flip it, the nap is still running down. And if you want your pillow in the center, you can see it's centered here. Or I can move it to the top, the bottom, but I'm going to place mine right in the center. And I think it's a whole lot easier to pin and sew while I have the back larger than to try to cut the back right to size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to pin all the way around this outer edge. And once again, there's 2 lines, but I'm going to sew on the inner line. So I'm going to sew on this one, not this one. And I'm going to sew all the way to the corner, pivot. When I get up to my zipper, I like to run my machine back and forth. And at each of the corners, I'm going to pivot. The one thing that you must do, we have to open our zipper a little bit. If we don't open our zipper, you can get it, but it's very hard. So we just want to open this enough that we can get our fingers in there to finish opening it before we turn it. So again, I'm just going to lay this on here. I'm going to pin all the way around, and then I'm going to sew. Okay, so now I've sewn around all 4 edges, and you can see that it's a perfect square on the back. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm just going to trim the edges of the pillow. And I'm just using the edge line because it's a good 1/2 inch, and I can cut right through all that bulk. So I just get a perfect square pillow, and after I cut all 4 sides, and you can see this way we're not cutting through any zipper because the zipper has those added ends on it. And then when I go to do my corners, I like to take the corner and I'm going to angle it across here. So I'm going to angle it like that. And then I'm going to take a nick into just the seam allowance and kind of angle it out like this. And that way it gives me a beautiful point. So I'm going to do that on all 4 corners, and then I'm going to turn it inside out. Here we get the pillow turned mostly inside out. This is one of my favorite notions, which is the precision point turner. And I like to just use that itty bitty point and poke out my corners. Now, this finishes a 16-inch pillow, and I always like to buy a pillow form 2 inches larger. So this is a 16-inch pillow, and I purchased an 18-inch pillow form because I want it to be nice and plump. So you can see it's a little bit bigger, but once I stick it inside, then I'm going to work this into the corners. So give me just a minute for that. We have a finished pillow, and I'll continue to work this down here and then just use some of that tape to take off all of your extra pieces. And when you turn it over, you have that beautiful back. So this makes a very professional pillow as opposed to just the envelope kind of pillow. I like this because it keeps it closed and it looks like a home deck pillow. So at the shop, we have all kinds of velveteen. So the Kimberbell has the navy and the red, and we have kind of an off-white and a taupe, a green, and a gray. So there's lots of choices that you can use for the back of your pillow. So anyways, I hope you've had fun and have fun stitching. We'll see you at the next video.